Good to see you. Hope everyone's having a perfectly enchanting Wednesday afternoon, evening, whatever time it happens to be where you are. You might not be able to tell because of what the sky looks like. But welcome to today's Writers on Writing session. Today we're joined by the wonderful Caroline Thompson. We'll be talking about her career, her process, such films as Edward Scissorhands, The Addams Family, The Secret Garden, Homeward Bound, Nightmare Before Christmas, and more. My name is Lauren O'Connor. I am a librarian at the Writers Guild Foundation Library. In case you don't know about the WGF Library, we are a repository of over 40,000 produced film and television scripts, as well as the archival collections from a lot of prolific screenwriters, and we're totally open to the public. So normally when there's not a pandemic going on, anybody can visit our library and read scripts and do research. And we're still here to help, even though the doors aren't open right at the moment. So just check out the website, wgfoundation.org for more information. Pro tip, it's the website for which you RSVP'd to this very panel. And I'm super excited to moderate this today because Caroline donated her materials to our library last year, and I was the one to process that collection. And one of my favorite things is to get anecdotes about certain script drafts or outlines directly from the writer that donated them. So in addition to, I'm sure, being very informative and inspiring on its own, this conversation will be a great companion, great commentary if you ever find yourself coming to the WGF library to do research with the Caroline Thompson collection. With that being said, I have some, sort of career spanning process related questions prepared here. And if you joining us here on Zoom have questions, there's a button down there where it's the Q&A button where you can submit them. And everybody also has the ability to upvote certain questions. Fair warning, being able to parse through submitted questions and also have an engaged conversation is the skill that I have not mastered yet. But please submit away. And if we find that there's something really germane to what we're talking about, we'll absolutely try to address it. There's also the chat function too, if people want to kind of chat amongst themselves or share resources and whatnot while this is going on. So with those housekeeping things said, I think we can get started here. Caroline, I'll try to substitute with my own energy the feeling of having lots of people applauding.
Yay!
Yay!
And my dogs are with me, so we might get a chorus of hoorays from them as well.
Yeah, I have a loud neighbor. Sometimes he shows up. I don't, But thanks so much for doing this. This is so great.
It's very sweet to be asked. Thank you very much. And thanks, Lauren, for agreeing to moderate. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love it. So in preparing for this, I was watching an earlier interview you did, and in it, you mentioned that even from a very early age, you always knew you wanted to be a writer. So just to kind of warm us up here, I'd like to know, where did you take inspiration from as maybe a kid or a budding writer?
Well, I wrote short stories starting from age 12 in 6th grade, and I can remember making my classmates cry in a good way. That was my intention. And so I just kept writing like these melodramatic, tragic stories that would, the rhythm of a screenplay that I love the best, which is loosen them up with laughter and then get them to weep, was sort of set when I was in 6th grade. And I wrote my first short story about, I'm from DC. I saw there was someone from my high school waving to me onto the chat, so hi. So there's an area of DC called Georgetown, and there was a blind flower vendor in Georgetown, and he became the protagonist of my first short story, and he got run over. And I guess I had him have like a watch on a chain, and somehow the watch on the chain fell into the street, and I don't know, this is clearly a long time ago. I think he dove into the street for the watch and got killed. And when they took him away and the watch was left behind, and the last image of the story is the watch on the chain in the street. Somehow this really worked and got all my classmates just bawling.
Mhm.
It's been sort of downhill from there.
I love that though. Um,
The-
so, so I saw that you studied English and classical literature in college, and I can't help noticing that a lot of what you've done in your career has ties to literature. You've done a few adaptations, and there are a lot of like literary motifs in your original work. Um, what were some of the formative, books, novels, other things that had an influence on you as a storyteller or future storyteller?
Gosh. Well, early on, I fell in love with words, and the sound of words. So I adored Virginia Woolf, who Mrs. Pregnell at NCS, the NCS girls, if you ever knew her, um, was great. She introduced me to that. So I really, really loved books that had like sort of transcendent language. But that being said, in my own work, and I did start out as a prose writer, I I sort of found that I mean, it may be because our culture is visual, that my work was visually driven more than it was driven by language. And I think so. I think that the transition over to screenwriting, which I have often likened to writing poetry because it's very formal and doesn't really have rules, but has the sense of it's you're limited by. There's a lot of limitations on it, unlike prose, where you can just go batshit, which is
Right.
more of a challenge. Um, so I think that somehow screenwriting became kind of a natural place for me, which was completely unanticipated. I mean, I moved to LA a year after graduating from Amherst College, and for no reason other than that, I wanted to get away from the East Coast and my family.
Mhm.
And but when we came out here, I came out here with a boyfriend, and he was also a writer, and we met a lot of people in the business and became fascinated by the business. But my dream was always to be a novelist, and I was lucky enough to publish a novel when I was 26. And but then I just really I kept being drawn to the business, both as a fascinating, weird entity and to movies themselves, which had never really appealed to me, and I can tell you why in a moment if you're interested.
Yeah.
Um, so I just lost my train of thought. Somebody dinged a little bit zoomed. I've been zoomed. Um, so yeah, my novel, I wanted to get to one of three directors. The first of whom was Brian De Palma, because Carrie was my favorite movie. The second of whom was David Lynch,
Mm-hmm.
because Eraserhead and my book had a lot in common. And the third was Penelope Spheris, who had made an absolutely magnificent documentary, which many of you may not have seen, called The Decline of Western Civilization. And
Yeah.
Penelope loved the book, and I said, well, you can have the option for $1 if I can write it with you. And that's sort of how it all happened for me. I had an early iteration of a computer, which weighed 40 pounds. It had a screen about this big. And we made this deal where I would take the computer to her house and she'd make us lunch and we'd work like that. And,
That's so cool.
that's how it went.
So what you were gonna talk about what you don't like about movies, or what, like, yeah.
I think it's what I love and what I fear and why I think they're so powerful, which is to say that when it was my brother's 6th or 7th birthday, so I would have been 3 or 4 years old. His birthday party was to go see a movie called The Time Machine, which was a very clunky horror movie from the 50s, early 60s. And we got to the theater late, and I found myself sitting in the front row between two little boys who I had no idea who they were. And I was overcome by the smell of stinky sneakers and absolutely petrified by this movie. so much so that I was pinned to my seat. I mean, I couldn't speak.
Mm-hmm.
And and the screen was overwhelming, and I'd never been to the movies before, and the room was dark, and and I couldn't see, it was just a nightmare. And then when we finished and went out to the parking lot, I wanted to cozy up to my mom for a little comfort, and my sister proceeded to shut her hand in the car door, so that I took that, and I just refused to go back to the movies, and they couldn't really understand why. So the next time I went to the movies was to see a movie I had loved on television, which also remains one of my favorite movies, which is called Meet Me in St. Louis, which is a Vincent Minnelli movie with Judy Garland, which I still adore. And I had adored it at the time, and I was about 8. And that's how they got me back to the movies, but I insisted on sitting in the back row. So unlike a lot of my friends in the business who grew up going to the movies every Saturday, I was the opposite. I was totally overwhelmed by the power of the movie theater and terrified of it. And, I think that's given me kind of an unusual respect for it that maybe other people don't really have.
Got it. Wow, that's really interesting.
I have other dramas I could tell you about.
Yeah. Let's go back to your novel Firstborn, and the process of working with Penelope Spheeris and adapting. I just want to get to the kind of like the nuts and bolts and what you learned from adapting your own novel into a script.
Well, for me, the most important thing is when you have a writing partner, make sure your hands are on the keys. Because then, if there's something that person wants to be in the script that you think is appalling, you just don't write it down.
Right.
So that was the biggest lesson. Penelope was a wonderful teacher. She's a wonderful person. She taught me, I'd always been a fan of Walter Hill's scripts, which somehow I saw early on, which are very, very, very economical. If you can get your hands on his and David Giler's draft of Alien, it is a piece of masterful writing. It really is like reading E.E. Cummings or something. I mean,
it's written like a poem. Yeah.
It's written like a poem, and the precision and writing with Penelope, she was also very emphatic about no adverbs, no passive tense. And so I sort of developed a style of writing scripts with her where, it wasn't quite as fine as Walter and David's work, but it certainly sort of nudged in the direction of very clean, very, very direct prose. I mean, I have a very strong feeling, and I think it's one reason I've been rather successful, is that a script, the first experience of your movie, if you're a writer, is by a reader. And you want to be very careful about guiding the readers to see what you see and think what you think and feel what you feel. And, so you don't open like it was a typical morning on a typical, I mean, you really want to, for the loss of a better word, you want to sell your vision. And so, to this day, I'm very, very clear about guiding a reader, A, and B, about guiding a director. So if I want a director to pay attention to something, I will put it, I don't write screen direction, which I think is an insult to a director. I don't, but what I do is if something's really important, I capitalize it and put it on its own line, and then move into the next paragraph. And my paragraphs are very short. People often say, "Oh my God, your script was so easy to read," which, if you're really a writer, that's a total insult. But as a screenwriter, it's the highest compliment you can get, because you want people just to essentially, have reading your script like going into the ocean and being carried by a wave. I mean, you just want, that's what you want.
Right.
So I don't know if I've answered your question or not,
Yeah,
but
no, there's a lot of really, really useful.
but the most important thing is keep your hands on the keys.
Yeah.
Don't give away
Yeah,
keyboard for anything.
that's quotable. Um, I wonder too, and you recommend like Alien as a great script to read. It's one of my favorite scripts too. Are there any other scripts that you know, maybe when you were starting out, or that you remember having kind of a...
Well, interestingly, one of the things I did to make money before I made money as a writer myself was I was a freelance script analyst, I guess they call them.
Mm.
And so rather than being hired by a studio, I don't know how it works now, but in those days, you know, studios had their own script analysts. Production companies tended to hire freelance script analysts, and I freelanced as a script analyst, and that was a great education in what works in a screenplay and what doesn't work in a screenplay. And literally the only script, I mean, I didn't do it for very long. It really is a burnout job, but the only script that I recommended, which was called, well, in short, it was called Natty Gann, but it was The Adventures of Natty Gann. It was a John Cusack movie. It got made. You know, it's like so I had pretty good instincts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though I was afraid of the movies, I later worked at a movie theater, so I saw a lot of movies, and I watched a lot of TV as a kid. And I think the rhythms of a film were deep inside us. I don't know if there's still the 5 o'clock movies. Probably not. But when I was growing up, every 5 o'clock on every weekday, there was a great movie on. Like my mom and I watched Casablanca, and I watched her cry, and so I just think all these experiences, they get inside you, and then when it's your turn to speak, as it were, you know, you have all these resources that you don't realize you have.
For sure. So you're obviously, you're known for, you know, your collaborations with Tim Burton, and information about how you both met is definitely out there. But just for context, as we discuss some of your work in greater detail, can you talk about how you met Tim?
Well, in brief, Tim and I were introduced by our agents. My agent claims it was his idea, so I'll give it to him. His name is John Burnham. He's at ICM, and he says it was his idea to introduce me to Tim. We were both, and he's still my agent, which is very unusual. My John Burnham. Tim had just made Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I hadn't had a movie made yet, but I did have my first film deal at Universal, and they really didn't know what to make of either of our sensibilities, so they introduced us, and we just got along instantly.
Mm-hmm. So Edward Scissorhands was your first produced writing credit. Can you talk about the genesis of that idea?
So, you know, Tim and I actually became really close friends before we collaborated. But I think pretty early in our friendship, we, you know, talked about working together. And so we would get together periodically and sort of spitball ideas. And so I don't know if it's still there. God, I haven't lived in LA in so long, but there was a bar on Santa Monica Boulevard in Santa Monica or West LA called the Bombay Bicycle Club. And sitting at the bar at the Bombay Bicycle Club, Tim told me about a drawing he had made in high school of a character who has scissors instead of hands. And quite honestly, it was the stupidest idea I ever heard in my life. Therefore, I knew that it was genius because it was so simple and so straightforward and so stupid and rife with metaphor and filled with possibilities. And Tim and I were, particularly at that time, both obsessed with suburbia. And my novel was sort of a horror story about growing up in suburbia. And this was sort of like the next iteration of that story. And I just knew instantly, not the details of the story, but, you know, the trajectory of the story. I knew that it was about, you know, someone who was different, but that the trajectory would be that the community was obsessed by his difference, and and applauding his difference and overcome with curiosity about his difference and overjoyed, et cetera, et cetera. And then it would take a turn where they turned against him.
Mm-hmm.
So that came to me as a flash. It's the only time I can think of where I actually used people I knew as models for characters. I mean, my mother was not an Avon lady, but she invited random people to live at her house all the time. My dad was given to saying really ridiculous things as if they were enormously important. Like the Bill character in Edward says things like, "Well, you can't buy a car with cookies now, can you, Jim?" I mean, it came to me very easily and quickly, and I thought all movies would come to me like that, and unfortunately, that's not true.
I just want to pause before we get into kind of like the nitty gritty of Edward Scissorhands. I just want to pause and talk about the types of characters that so often appear in your scripts. It's a lot of kind of like humanizing characters that are a little different or scary. And I think about Johnny Cash talking about how his favorite movie was Frankenstein because it was about a guy made of bad parts trying to be good. And I've seen you mention your love of animals and how that inspires you with regard to character. So basically what I want to know is, how do you approach developing characters?
Well, you just said it. All my characters are based on animals. Whether or not they're literally an animal or emotionally an animal, they're all based, I mean, I did the verboten thing, which I didn't know was verboten, of talking to the actors on the set of Edward Scissorhands, because I didn't know writers weren't supposed to do that. I didn't go the first week of the shoot, but I did go the second week, and both Johnny Depp and Alan Arkin were enormously confused by their characters of Edward and the father, Bill. When Alan approached me, I told him just the anecdote I told you about my dad saying very ridiculous things as if they were very important. And so he was like, aha, I got it. And also when Johnny said, I don't get this at all, can you help me? I said, Edward the character is based on the best dog I ever met in my life, where she was so present and curious and interested and alert, and she had everything but the vocal physiology to speak, and so he also went, I got it.
Is that a part, like a formal part of your process? Do you think, this character is an animal? What kind of animal are they?
Oh, it's not like, no, he's a panther, and no, it's not like that. It's just sort of in the clarity of their emotions. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the case of Edward, he was literally that dog. It's some other, in Homeward Bound, those animals were based on my animals, but right. And it's an emotional thing. It's I think movies are, their blessing and their curse is their ability or inability, and sometimes it's a little wavery, to share the insides of somebody, because what we're seeing are their outsides. Now, some writers are more skilled at giving you the insides of a character than others, but I've always felt that the insides need to be very clean and simple and apprehensible. I mean, yeah. I'm not a writer who wants to leave an audience not understanding who somebody is. But yeah, I mean, Frankenstein is very key to my understanding of character and my feelings about what it's like to be in the world. Though when I was a kid, I used to also on Friday nights stay up late and watch the midnight horror movie, and the one that would always get to me was The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
I love that one too.
And I just would be weeping at the end when he was carrying the woman into the swamp. I always felt sorry for the monsters.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting how you sort of like take that like a step further than in the stuff that you ended up kind of like writing. So I think this is kind of like a good segue. What I love about the materials that you donated to the library, particularly with Edward Scissorhands, is there's like a very clear trajectory of process. And just yesterday, I visited the office, and in my mask, I was looking at some of the stuff. And I want to know how you get from initial idea to final draft, and like the steps that are involved. And to aid us in talking about this, I took some pictures while I was in the office yesterday, and I was hoping we could share some of those images. And you know, if memory serves, if you could kind of tell us what we're looking at.
All right, I'll do my best. It's a long time ago.
Let's see.
Oh, that's so funny. So while the story came to me sort of, you know, like Diana was sprung from Zeus's head, the details of the consequences of having scissors for hands, I would end up making lists about that, because I didn't want to miss anything, and I was also a little bit stumped by it. So, but I'd never put point plugs on him or gloves, but I can see how one would want to. And what's so funny to me about seeing these cards is I've always said I never use cards, but clearly that's a lie.
You're lying to yourself.
Here they are. And, you know, but I never used them since that I can recall.
I've sort of noticed in processing, you know, writers' papers, it is kind of a habit of a lot of successful writers to make lists, like just like lists of things that could happen, lists of things that the characters do, lists of just, and I guess it just like aids in understanding what you're trying to, you know, it's in a simple and clear kind of way.
Yeah, I don't recall making lists. I mean, what's really weird is I have a very poor memory, always have, but I can put a script down and come back to it 5 years later and know exactly where I was and what I'm doing.
Right.
So obviously this work happens on some level that I'm not really present for.
Sure.
So, but I do remember being stumped about, like, okay, now what?
Right.
What do you do with his hands? I mean, Tim had the idea that he plays Tim drums or something, but I never understood that. I didn't want him to be a drummer, so I wanted him to make topiaries and ice sculptures. You know that.
Well, and I found these other note cards that I just loved. There was like a little like stack of them that were all about structure, like structure and subtext. Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, and it's just kind of, but it's all just like really simple and clean.
Yeah.
And you know, it's like, so like that's, you know, that's what's on the surface, but then there was another one that's like beneath the surface.
Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any memory of like what
Someone just wrote dot matrix. You're right. That's a dot matrix printer. And you could see how those things printed out where I had to tear them apart. You can see the perforations there. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Lauren. I was.
Oh, no. Let's. Yeah, dot matrix, and the other thing that was fun about the collection too was the drafts of Edward Scissorhands that were on floppy disk.
Are you able to access them?
We haven't tried yet. We still have to get that card reader.
I think I have a floppy disk reader. I might have put it in the box. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there was an intern who was like, "Oh, I know how to get this off. Like, you'll be able to access this." So we'll see.
What's interesting is that, you know, I was still mostly a prose writer when I got this project. So I wrote the first draft entirely in prose. And I wrote it really fast, like less than 3 weeks. and so it's just sort of interesting to me. I don't, to be perfectly honest, these are charming, but I don't remember writing them.
Did you ever,
but I like that he's lulled by a false notion that things are as they appear, that they make sense and are simple. I mean, I really did want to track his emotional experience of being around people for the first time.
Right.
And of feeling accepted and then feeling turned on. Those were really important emotions to me. Mm-hmm. And they were really important to me to get straight. And obviously I thought about it.
Right.
Apparently I thought about
it. somewhere.
Wrote it down.
So I think there was there's another image there, and Dustin's manning the slides. There was this a treatment. So I'm wondering if the process was maybe note cards and thoughts, and then
do you know how many pages this particular treatment is?
This one I think was 25, something like that.
Well, this is probably what I wrote just off the why I wrote all this stuff about scissors. That's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like I was trying to be writerly. Gradually growing finer and finer, more rhythmic, cacophony becoming melody. Oh, for God's sake. So.
Well, and
yes, this was much more my process at that time, where I could think out loud. I could think more clearly and more quickly in prose.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting too, I think the next slide, I just took this screen grab from, this was the draft that Tim, made his notes in, and it's interesting that you say that the first draft was very prosy, and kind of written in prose, because that's what I thought when I looked at this. But I also was really struck by how intact it is, and how exactly like the movie it is.
Yeah, people are always saying, gosh, Tim, you imitated Tim. I was like, no.
Right.
Whatever. They think it came as a fart out of his butt, but it didn't. It came as a fart out of my butt.
Right. Well, and if you look at that draft too, for anyone who's watching this, if you come in and do research, looking at these drafts, you notice that Tim's notes are actually pretty sparse and kind of far between. Yeah.
I have no idea what it's like to work with him now, but at that time, the great joy of working with Tim was that he really respected the people, the expertise of the people around him. So, Danny Elfman was given complete carte blanche, which he says is not so true anymore when he works with Tim. I was totally free to do what came to me. He didn't, other than telling me the image, sharing that image with me, which I never saw the drawing of until long after the movie was wrapped. That was really the extent of his participation. That said, the movie wouldn't exist without that, amazing and stupid and lovely image. And so I shared story credit with him. The Guild did not want me to share story credit with him because he hadn't written, but I felt that without the image, the story wouldn't have existed. So to this day, I'm glad I made that choice.
Sure. So just kind of, I wonder, do you remember as you were sort of drafting this, what your, let's see, I actually have this question right now. So when working with Tim on this project specifically, do you remember kind of the back and forth that you had during the process, or was it kind of you wrote stuff and then he sort of looked at it and gave you feedback, or what was that? Yeah.
I don't believe in showing anybody something until I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
I don't share pages, and I will never do that. I, I want to say this is what I want, and I want to be able to say it with confidence. And so I don't recall how many drafts of this I wrote before I showed him anything, but traditionally now, I'll write 5 drafts of something before anybody else ever sees it. And that's simply to satisfy myself and to feel like I've communicated and won't be misunderstood, and that I've made the movie I want to see. Now I'm interested in what they have to say, sort of interested.
Got it. Yeah, sort of. So I think that's it for the slides for now. We'll come back to them.
Okay.
But
thank you for taking such good care of my papers.
Well, yeah, I mean, my God, it's one of my favorite collections now.
Oh, you're sweet.
Following Edward Scissorhands, you really did a lot of adaptation work. There's like the Addams Family and The Incredible Journey, which became Homeward Bound, Secret Garden, Black Beauty. Can you talk about your approach to adapting pre-existing material and how you put your spin on, a beloved story or even a franchise like the Addams Family?
Well, it wasn't a franchise then. We made it a franchise,
right.
But well, so the great privilege and the danger of having a movie made that wasn't terribly popular at the time, by the way, Edward wasn't, but it caught the eye of a lot of executives. And so I was offered a tremendous amount of stuff, and I could barely catch my breath, and then I would be offered something else. And I'd go like, oh my God, I love The Secret Garden. I have to do that. Oh my God. I did not want to do the Addams Family. It was proposed as, a gigantic commercial, studio enterprise. And that's not who I am. I write personal, character-driven stories. And so, but Scott Rudin, who was the person who gave the green light, well, he didn't give a green light. He's the one who gave us the deal at Fox. He was the president of Fox for Edward. And so he had been tracking me. And so he approached me about the Addams Family. And I said, no, I don't, a big movie, blah. And so he said, no, why don't you meet Larry Wilson, who was one of the Beetlejuice writers? And I had never met Larry before. Tim does have a tendency to keep people apart. He likes to be the conduit, it seems. Anyway, so I said, oh God, do I have to? And he said, no, you'll love him. Please meet him. And so I did, and I fell in love with him, not literally, but emotionally, friendship. And so we decided that we would write the Addams Family together, and we've literally spent 18 months laughing our heads off, which is not a very productive way to make a living as a writer. And I've been a writer, other than the collaboration with Penelope. I collaborated with Larry, but it's not really in my DNA to do that. As much as I love Larry and enjoyed working with him, I really am a solitary writer. My draw to the Addams Family was Charles Addams cartoons, and I said, okay, I'll do it if we can, keep his voice and his tone and his, and all that went out the window. Nobody really, it's like living in the world we live in now. Oh yeah, great idea. And then, what? No, you can't do that.
Right.
And as for Homeward Bound, I loved Incredible Journey as a kid, and I suggested to Disney that they'd do a remake. And that's how that came about. But I was fired 5 times from that project. I wrote a draft, and they said thank you, and I didn't even know it was being made until I was actually living with Danny Elfman at the time. They offered him the score. I didn't know the movie had been made. I was the one who shitted this project. Oh. It is a crazy business, kids. And at the end of the project, they brought me back to do voiceover for the dogs and the cat, because this was just pre-Babe, so their lips weren't moving, so it could be anything. And I was delighted to do it, and I loved that project, and I loved the movie, and I knew it was going to just do gangbusters, and I'm really happy that it did. It's still the only movie of mine that makes me cry.
Yeah.
I know that fucking dog comes over the hill at the end of the movie. But Dwayne Dunham, the director, was an editor. He was trained by George Lucas's wife. He was a genius editor. So the dog, it takes forever to come, and I find myself just bawling. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But anyway, so but when I approach, like, okay, so here's the unusual thing about my adaptations is that I read the book or watch the movie or whatever. I never read the book of Incredible Journey, actually, but like in Secret Garden, I probably spent longer writing the screenplay than she wrote on the novel. That woman wrote 75 novels, Frances Hodgson Burnett. She supported a huge family on her writing. So, and the novel actually has all those flaws. You can feel like it's inconsistent and there's contradictions. And you can feel that she blazed through it. At any rate, when I went to adapt it, it's like I wanted, when they offered me the job, I was like, sure, I'll do that. But there was a different story. There was a different set of feelings in my head than there were actually in the book when I went to reread it. And so in that case, I worked really hard to honor what meant so much to me about the book as a kid. And so it's a very simple story about a girl who discovers her potential. And it's a very weirdly sexual story about a secret place, and and it's dead when you get there, and then you bring it to life, and it's very pre-adolescent sex, really.
Yeah.
So I read the book. I probably never reread it after that, and to this day, I couldn't tell you what was in the movie I wrote and what was in the book. And that's true of Black Beauty. That's true of pretty much every adaptation I've done. And it's not meant as disrespect. It's just sort of I take them in. I put them in. They go into whatever's in this head, but they become mine. And
right.
And not in any kind of egomaniacal way, but just in an emotional way. I really can't remember who wrote what. And I don't think I think that's probably a good thing, because I don't believe in being slavishly devoted to a piece of material. I think, again, it's all I'm interested in is emotion.
Right. So let's move now to Nightmare Before Christmas, which came out in 1994. Tell us how this project found its way to you, or how you found your way to it.
Well, I was not the first writer hired on that project. As I said, I was involved with Danny Elfman, and he happened to be living at my house in Burbank at the time because his house was being renovated. So he was staying at my house, and he had set up a little studio there. And he and Tim and Michael McDowell, who was the first writer they hired, who had been the primary Beetlejuice writer, keeps coming back, Beetlejuice. They would meet at my house. I'd be out in my office. I had no idea, but I would listen. I heard Danny creating the songs, and so I was very much aware of the project and sort of the impulses behind it and what interested Danny particularly. And I was a little pissed off. I hadn't been asked to participate, to be honest. But anyway, so there you go. And this is not to besmirch Michael, God rest his soul, he's gone now. He had a very serious drug problem, and when it came time to turn in the screenplay, he had not written a word, and they were already the Henry Selick had been hired as the director. The whole team had been set up in San Francisco. They'd brought all these animators over from Europe to create images of the Halloween Town characters and so forth. And Michael had no material. He took Danny's lyrics and reformatted them as script. And so they were up Schitt's Creek, to be honest. So David Hoberman, who was the president of Disney at that time, who I had worked with on other projects, maybe he was on Homeward Bound, but he was also on this other project of mine that never got made. he came to me and he said, "Can you help us?" And I, I didn't know if I could or not, but when I thought about it, a few images came to my head.
Mhm.
And so Danny had basically told Jack Skellington's story in song.
Mhm.
The Sally character had nothing. But the images that came to me were for Sally. So I had the image, and again, it's the love of Frankenstein. I had the image of Sally throwing herself out of that tower and coming apart because she's stitched together, and then stitching herself together. And I had the other image of how at the end having her take off her leg to distract Oogie Boogie so she could rescue Sandy Claus. So with those two images, I knew I could make contributions, and so I said sure, and wrote very quickly. Again, it's actually about a week, but at that time, animated films were maximum 75 minutes, and so much of it was taken up in song. It wasn't really that much material, but I that's how I got involved. And my greatest contribution was Sally. The character, as she was originally conceived, was very Zoptig, like Corpse Bride later became, which is not a character I really get. So I said, I kind of see her more as the little match girl. Could you, I asked Rick Heinrichs, who was designing, can we try that? And so we did, and we ended up with sort of Sally as the little match girl, Frankenstein.
And since you bring that up, I have two other slides that I want to show. Dustin, if you're listening, yep, perfect. Because I just think that her description in this script is so, her mouth is a tragic slash. Can you talk a little bit about just like what was important for you to kind of convey just in those like opening moments, because this is awesome. And then like the second slide that I have there, it goes so far, Sally gains substance as she gains conviction. I just think that's just such a cool way to kind of put that into the script, so that they know exactly like, where she goes.
Yeah, I'm kind of impressed myself. But I guess with Dr. Frankenstein, his name wasn't Frankenstein. What was it? Somebody tell me.
Someone put it in the chat really quick.
Yeah, Dr. Anyway, I'm having a brain fire. Finkelstein, thank you so much. That's it. Thank you. God, thank you so much. So, it was that her part of the story was about gaining independence and about getting away from this overbearing parent figure and getting out, and leading her own life and having her own feelings and her own impulses. Today, I would probably give her even more of those things, but this was the 80s or 90s, and we were still in chains, women. You can tell that I love writing, so that's sort of I suppose I still write sort of like that, but I don't really know.
I just wanted to share those because I thought those were so cool.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, that's good, Dustin. Okay.
Thanks, Dustin.
So my other follow-up question with regard to Nightmare Before Christmas, I want to talk about, sort of coming onto a project when there's already kind of like characters and a story. But a story.
No, it was crazy. It was like building a house people were already living in. They were already animating. They were animating the Lock, Shock, and Barrel song when I went up to look around the studio where Dr. Finkelstein was born. As he was, so what they did was they had these animators come from all over the world, do these drawings, as I said, and they plastered them all over the studio. and I went around looking at them, and there was an image of this, little man with duck lips, with his brain pulled back, scratching with his head, skull pulled back, scratching his brains. And I thought, I can use him.
Right.
I mean, so it was a truly collaborative birth, but it was really strange. And Nick Park, the great English animator, is the only person I have ever heard who said something's wrong with that movie because it doesn't go here. And he's absolutely right. But we did the best we could, and people seemed to go for it.
Well, and specifically, I was just wondering about, if because the movie already had songs, right? Or
all the songs written except for Sally's song.
Got it.
And probably the finale song, I think, weren't written yet.
So I wonder if you have any sort of like insights or anecdotes into kind of building like the undergirding that sort of like supports those big moments that are songs, if you're coming on as a writer. That's something that really fascinates me.
Right. Well, I mean, so whenever I'm invited to a conference and I find myself on the stage with other writers, I haven't been invited in a long time, probably because of the story I'm about to tell you, which is that writers seemingly love to pontificate about their process, and so I've always let the other writers talk first, and they're going like, wow, first act turn and the blah blah blah. And my dad was a lawyer, and he loved to pretend he was stupid, so I would pull the stupid country lawyer act at the end of, when the panel came to me, I go like, golly, you guys are really smart. I don't know about all that stuff. I just write. And actually, that's pretty accurate. I trust my intuition. It's very non-articulated. I mean, it looks like I articulated a lot more when I was thinking about Edward than I ever did after. Mm-hmm. Every movie is pretty much the same movie, really. So I guess it's good I thought about it once. But it was an intuitive putting together. And by the way, Danny, when I showed him the script, because he was the first person to see it, he said, "Oh, this isn't what I thought you should do at all. I think you should throw this out." And I was like, you know what? It's what I wrote. I'm going to show them, and it pretty much stayed that way.
Yeah. Love that. So we have a question that was submitted to the question submission. I think it's really, really good, and I'd love to get to it. It's from Audrey Knox, and it's how do you build big genre worlds in a believable way without getting bogged down by details and losing sight of the heart and the humor?
Well, Audrey, first of all, I'm not sure how many big genre worlds I've built. And surrealism is my middle name, so I love anything that's a little bit, that. I just start with character. Everything comes out of character. Every single thing comes out of character. The most recent work I did was an adaptation of Juman Malouf's book called A Trilogy of Two. And I felt it just needed to start with knowing what we were getting into. So contrary to the way the book was structured, I just introduced the bad guy right off the bat. And the bad guy happens to wear a bunch of cats like they're a cloak. And so you got to see this man who appeared to be wearing a cloak, and then at the end of the scene, all the cats separate from him. But that's also his character. It's not just an image, it's his character. And so that's the kind of thing I try to think like, okay, what's the distillation here? And what am I trying to convey? What feeling do I want to convey at any given moment? What do when I went to the first preview of Edward Scissorhands, and it was my first movie, and thank God, because it was a great experience, and it's never been matched since. So went to the preview, rode in a limo down to Orange County with Tim and Danny, and every couple that was going in, the boy looked like the bad kid in like Jim, and Tim immediately went to the bathroom and spent the whole preview vomiting. I went into the theater and sat in the back row and had the miraculous experience of the people watching laughing at the things I had hoped were funny. And then sort of midway through, the turn happens and you can hear a little bit of sniffling and like, and then by the end there's like, ah! I have never been happier in my entire, but the thing played, it worked. And that's not to be cynical, but you know, I'm a writer. I am a manipulator. I'm trying to get people to feel what I want them to feel when I want them to feel it. And so that's really the ball I always keep my eye on.
That's really useful. So this is another question that I think is really good too. This is from Lauren Krikorian. What's your writing routine? What's your typical writing day like? When you're working on something, how much time do you spend writing in a day?
So over the years, it's evolved into something very specific, actually. I write 5 pages a day. And no matter how long that takes me or a time or how short a time that takes me, that's what I produce. I found that if I get inspired and write 10 or more pages, I'm so wiped out that I don't write for a few days. So for me, 5 pages a day, the steady march is really how I get it done. And if you think about it, if 5 pages a day, in a month, you'll have a first draft.
Yeah.
And I've always found that just very satisfying. And, you know, not, this sounds really pretentious, but Ernest Hemingway had a piece of advice, which just is to say, don't leave the desk until you know what you're doing the next time you come to the desk. And I always have held that close to my heart. So I don't leave going like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing next. I leave usually leave in the middle of it. But I've really learned not to do more than those 5 pages. That's
good advice.
I mean, that's true of a first draft. If I'm revising, you know, those rules kind of go out the window. I'll just sort of revise until I get hungry, but which is pretty soon. I don't have as much stamina as I used to have. It used to be that I'd get to my desk at about, I'd get up, I'd read the paper, I'd get to my desk at about 8:30. And this is when I lived in Burbank, and I would write till about lunchtime, and then I'd write again until 4 o'clock when the wild parakeets would populate the tree outside my office. And I would then get on my horse and gallop around Griffith Park for an hour or two, and then go out to dinner with friends and get drunk. It was a fabulous life.
Wonderful.
It was really great.
So I always, we're kind of like winding down time-wise here.
Oh gosh.
And I think it would be, it's always great to end on kind of an active note, but it's okay if you don't have an answer for this. Do you have any favorite, do you have any favorite writing exercises or any like tips or practices for how to get creative juices flowing?
Well, it's really funny. You know, I actually am pretty much retired right now. And as I said earlier, I've been a professional writer in my own mind since I was about 12. And so I literally never wrote a word that I didn't think someone else was going to read from that point forward until right now. And I write a few pages in the morning when I first get up. And I've fallen in love, and it's not for anybody but myself, for the first time since I was literally 12 years old. And I've fallen in love with writing again. I've fallen in love with words. I've fallen in love with images. I've just fallen in love again, and that's actually been wondrous and miraculous, I have to say. But in terms of warming up for a day's work, no, I just would always just go, I'm in.
But it seems like the advice there is just like, you know, write for yourself at the very least.
Well, I mean, I'm so grateful to have discovered it at this late time. I mean, mostly I'm an oil painter these days. And that's been a great discovery in my dotage, to find that I have a new way of expressing myself that I never did before, that I'm madly in love with. but to fall back in love with language, I have to tell you, has been a giant gift.
That's a wonderful, wonderful note to end on. Wow, this was such a great talk. Thank you so much. I loved every minute.
Well, you're sweet. Thank you so much for having me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. You know, we sort of aged out people. Love the attention.
That's so great, so great. And it looks like other people liked it too. So.
Oh, well, thank you guys. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for stopping by. Bye. Stay safe, everyone.